So with me today on the Mayor of Money podcast is Holly Simmons of Golden Lasso. Holly has a very interesting company focused in different areas, including leadership and family business, as well as coaching, facilitation, and training. So that's a lot of words there. We're gonna delve into that. But first of all, Holly, big thanks for agreeing to be part of the Mayor of Money podcast. I look forward to our discussion.
Oh, thank you so much, Rick. It is such a pleasure to be here, and I'm really excited about our conversation.
Well, let's get into it. And first of all, let's give people who are listening or watching just a little bit about a background about how you got into your current business, which you've had in the current form, more or less, for 9 years.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah. It was a windy road, Rick, to get to where I am now. And I believe that path has actually added a lot of value to the work I'm doing now. So my background, in fact, when I went to school for marketing, and I was in a corporate world in a marketing role for a decade. And then in 2008, decided to start my own marketing consulting business. And through a process of working with a bunch of different clients and getting into facilitation and workshops and mentoring marketers, I decided that I wanted to do more of that and coaching and facilitation and training. So I went through in 2015 to evolve my career. And through that process and a discovery of, well, who is it that I want to serve? Knowing that I value family is one of my core values, and looking at my trajectory of my whole career, every job I've had, I discovered that I had been working with family businesses 99% of my career, from my very first job at a Dairy Queen in Simcoe, Ontario, to my clients in my marketing world. And so I realized there was something about me and family business that worked really well together. And at that point, I decided, well, I need to learn more about what I don't know about family businesses. And so I did my Family Enterprise Advisor designation through Family Enterprise Canada. And that put me on a path of serving families. And it is such a privilege to work with family businesses in Southwestern Ontario.
So when you first dug into the whole issue of helping family businesses, and you went through the particular training, the FEA program, what were the aha moments for you? What are some of the things that you found out about that you hadn't really thought about as it relates to family-owned business?
Yeah, great question. One of the first things that became clear to me was the impact the familyness has on business decision making. I'll give you an example. Before I was understood the complexity of family business, I worked with family businesses, and I was working in the capacity of a marketing consultant. And I would work with a family business person, and they would, yeah, we want to do this initiative. They would talk about it, and then all of a sudden it would hit roadblocks. And I was really confused as to what was happening. And as I learned more about family dynamics and how it plays out in the family, what I realized was that, unbeknownst to me, there were dynamics at play around specifically decision making that was related to familyness versus strictly business decisions. And it was impacting how the business as a whole moved forward. And sometimes it would get in the way, and sometimes it wouldn't. Sometimes family businesses make decisions quickly because they have a very, not casual, but a way of conversation and a way of making decisions that is maybe less formal than how we would typically think about it in business. And that can be a bit of a double-edged sword. So that was one thing that became really clear to me, is the impact that family dynamics play within a business. And oftentimes the family doesn't even see them. It's an invisible force that can be a positive or a negative on family business.
I remember a number of years ago being at a seminar or a workshop, and the guest speaker was talking about family-owned business. But the one takeaway I still remember, it's probably a couple of decades ago, was that families are socialist and business is capitalist. And there can be a challenge meshing the two together, which is really what you just outlined. So So what are the problems? What are the challenges that you're brought in to address when you're hired?
Yeah. When I come into a family business, they're usually at that place where transition is on the horizon, meaning we've got next gen working in the business. They may be in their mid to late 20s, early 30s. And we have the owner who's thinking about what's next. And they still, in their mind, have, they still have another decade ahead of them. However, the conversation starts happening like, how are we going to move through this? Especially when the owner is what I would call still at the hub of decision making. It's still really driven by the owner making decisions in the day-to-day operations. It's an owner-operated structure. The bench strength of the team is probably not there. So the leader right now is holding up the team versus the team supporting the leader. And so when I come in and start working with an organization, the owner is looking to move from, let's say, a stage 2 company where they're just getting through the day. They don't have the time or the bandwidth to do much more, like work on the business, deal with all of those important but not urgent questions that are keeping them up at night, to help them shift and think differently, ultimately, so that they can be a stage 3 company, stage 4 company, where they have a company that runs really well and allows them the space and time to actually work on those things that help them transition. So that's where I will work with a company as well as a next gen, helping them figure out what their path needs to be, their growth path, and what they want to do. So those conversations we need to have about, well, what are they good at? What does the company need? Where do they see themselves in the future? So those are the elements I come into a business at. So I should say that the work I do is in the business circle. So if we think about the 3-circle model, we've got the business, ownership, and family. A lot of the work I do is in the business circle, which connects with the family, and it allows for dynamics to start to shift, but in the business setting.
It's interesting as you were talking there. I started thinking about some of the well-known family tussles that have taken place in the corporate world in Canada.
Yeah.
And you look at the McCains, you look at more recently the Rogers family, and what are the commonalities of the businesses or families that are able to overcome those challenges? What are the key tenets or key philosophies that the leader has or the family has that enables businesses to deal with some of these challenges that are going to come up from time to time in the relationship?
Yeah, such a great question. And one that, families want to know to be able to emulate. The first one would be communication. They have a strong communication within the team, within the family, that allows them to talk about difficult things. That also means that there's space for people to be individuals, and people are accepted within the family for who they are, as well as holding space for the greater good of the whole family. So imagine we're balancing individuals, and we're also balancing the need for the whole. So there's got to be this ability to see and hold space for both. The other piece is trust. So for us to be able to have these conversations, to hold space for everyone, to be individuals and the family, we have to trust one another. We have to trust that we can be honest, that we can say our truth, that we can be open with one another, and we're not going to be blamed or persecuted or be the black sheep, if we're considered the contrarian or the skeptic. There has to be an element of trust that we can show up in our truth and that the family accepts that. And then there's, of course, planning and doing the necessary work. What's interesting is when you look at the things that successful families do well, the planning piece is extremely important, yet where families tend to fail is because they don't have the other three happening: the communication, the space, or the trust happening within the family. And those things are really key.
So with family-owned businesses, I mean, most of them just don't have family members employed. They have other people employed for whatever role. And I'm sure there's certainly some sensitivity with regard to the non-family employees that are contributing significantly to the corporation. I'm sure that there can be some sensitivities there and some challenges and some questions that some of the non-family employees have with regard to a family member, younger family member rising through the ranks. How does the company, how does the leadership of the company bring in the non-family employees?
You know, Rick, I've seen families do this differently. And though there is best practice out there, the fact is I see families doing it in all different ways, depending on their family situation. You know, best practice says, well, next gen needs to have 3 to 5 years of external experience before they start working in the family business to learn on someone else, learn somewhere else and build credibility with existing employees. But the fact is that doesn't always happen, and it happens way less than we think. Next gens are brought into the business for a number of reasons, and often because their skill set and their value they can bring to the family business is extremely important. And so they come in as their, let's say, their first job right out of school. So the challenge that then the next gen faces is the perceived, underlying perceived notion as to why they got the job, which is because they were related to the owner, which makes it challenging for them because they are now under a microscope of being observed and it being judged. So the expectation for the next generation is extremely high. Where I've seen companies do this very well is that they've clearly explained that to their next gen. Like, look, this is what's going to happen. You're going to feel like you're going to have to work harder. You're going to probably have to put in more time to build the respect of the team in your capability. The other piece that I've seen them do really well is they've actually put the next gen in different roles where they're reporting to not the business owner themselves. They've got another person who has been told that you give them and treat them like everyone else, give them good feedback in the sense of what they can do better on, because we want them to grow and understand the business. So there's this trust in the team and the team leadership to be able to help groom the next gen. But it is a really tough, it can be a very tough role for next gens, especially if they've never worked elsewhere.
I assume it's a continuing process, that it's not something you just put a Band-Aid on, or you create a program and a script to follow for a short period of time. It's got to be part of the DNA of the organization and the DNA of the everybody involved, that you got to keep communicating, as you said, right from the beginning.
Yeah, that transparency and communication is really key. I believe that leadership as a whole and any career advancement is about continuous learning. And so no matter what the role is, there's got to be a plan or a journey that we're on so that we can continually, reach for the next step, do a little bit better tomorrow than we did today, every day a little up, So I think it has to be constantly reviewed. And when I say constantly, I'm not talking about, it's something that every hour we're thinking about, but it has to be, okay, what if for the next 90 days, where's my focus? What's my goal for the year? Where do I see myself in 5 years? If I work backwards, what are the skills I'm needing to develop? So we start to be intentional about how we're investing in and planning for the future.
So you mentioned leadership there, and leadership is something that's obviously a very much of a challenge for family-owned business, but it's a challenge for anybody in business today. And recognizing this is a big part of the focus of what you do, working with clients, is providing guidance and direction with regard to leadership and improving leadership skills. Recently I read there's $170 billion a year spent in North America, or invested in North America, in leadership training. And there's over 200,000 books on leadership on Amazon. So what's working in leadership today? What are the challenges today that may be different than 10, 20, 30 years ago for the leadership of different corporate organizations of any size?
Yeah. Great question. And the idea of the size of the training and the number of books of leadership, right? Like it's massive. It's a massive market. And how do you know? Well, what to review. What I am seeing is that the shift is happening whereby in the 20th century leading organization, it was a command and control philosophy. The hierarchy, the owner or the leader has the answers, who would disseminate it down to the team. But the fact is that the world that we live in today is not the same as it was in the 20th century. And so leadership has shifted over the last 20 years. The learning and the information we have on brain science, the amount of research that we have now has provided and opened up a whole new way of leading. The challenge is, of course, that we've got people who grew up in a 20th century leadership model, and that has served them, and it has worked. It is what they've known. And this new method, the 21st century model, is about collaboration. It's about co-creating. It's about leaders, distributed leadership, meaning that on a project team, it's maybe not the same leader every time. It's different people will lead. And so now we have a much broader set of people who are influencing decision-making. And from a family business owner who has been used to the hierarchy, and look, families are often hierarchical, right? So we're shifting to a leadership style that's collaborative, and it can feel in opposition of the command and control. It can feel like it's slower because we have to involve more people in the decision making. And yet when we're faced with they call it a VUCA world, it's volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. When we're faced with this world as owners and as business leaders, we can't know everything. And so we have to rely on our team's knowledge to make good decisions and to minimize risk. And that's the shift that leaders are grappling with, especially as we have multi-generations working in businesses who require different things and who are used to different leadership models. That's what we're faced with right now as leaders.
So I look at publicly owned companies, that are publicly traded, and so much of the compensation for the leadership is based on stock options, and so it's driving those quarterly earnings, is driving those dividends to the shareholders, because that'll trigger the stock options and the monetary compensation for the leaders.
Right.
Is there a way? Because when you think about it, that's almost an old model, that the way somebody's incentivized, the quarterly earnings and what's good for the shareholder and so on and so forth. Is there a need in public sector companies? I don't mean public sector, but the public companies, publicly owned companies, to approach leadership differently. And I guess there's got to be a divide. You referred to next gen, and I want to dive into that. But there's got to be a divide from that sort of traditional command and control mindset compared to a next gen today that's in their 20s or in their 30s.
Yeah. Now, my experience in the public sector is limited, Rick. So I would say that anecdotally, that I believe that public companies are already focused on this. and how they're implementing that is through ESG and through diversity, equity, and inclusion. So they're moving beyond, though they're compensated based on stock options. I believe that public organizations are looking at that differently to include other measures to ensure that it's a holistic picture versus only driven by stock options. So I believe that there is a shift happening also in the public sector.
So let's get back to the privately owned businesses then. And with regard to that next gen, and you think the boomers have a certain mindset, and the boomers have been the dominant cohort for a long time, and now are of retirement age or getting closer to retirement age and starting to phase out. Different generations who are younger have a different view of work, have a different view of what's important in life. How do you bridge that?
Well, that's like the $1 million question. How do we bridge that? In the work that I do, it's about understanding perspective. So it's about finding the commonalities that we share, which often are the values that we can align around. And the how can be different. The how we're going to get there can look a little different as long as we're aligned on the vision and the values. It's allowing each generation to understand the perspective of the other, having the rising generation have space and create an awareness and appreciation for all of the amazing things that their parents, have done and created, and the challenges that they have come up against, and see that what they're doing is they're standing on the shoulders of the people who and their family members who came before them. So having this gratitude and this acknowledgement of what their parents have gone through to create what they've created. And for the parent, the ownership group, helping them understand the perspective of that their children often haven't grown up in the lifestyle that they did, and to expect them to understand what it was like for them growing up and appreciate it at the level that they do is a little bit of a difficult expectation, because they created an environment for their kids because they wanted a different life for their kids. And so we have to understand that we created the environment that we're in and respect the new and innovative ideas of the next generation, and being curious about our rising generation's interests, what they're looking for in a business, and why it is that they want to have more time with their family. And the fact is, we've created that for them, that desire, because they want that for their family, and we should celebrate that. It's about figuring out how we can facilitate that and have successful family businesses that can create the wealth coming into the family.
So is it a case of, for some, they've seen their mom, their dad run a business, put 60 or 70 hours a week into the business, been away at key times for birthdays, anniversaries, sporting events, ballet recitals, whatever. And they say, I want to be home for my kids. Is that part of it?
You got it. Yeah. So they are choosing, they want something different. They want to be invested and in their family, as well as I also find that it's a partnership. If they're married, they have a partner, that there's this balance, this difference in sharing of family responsibilities that is more of a balanced and shared philosophy versus it being, you look after this and I look after that and we'll do our own thing and then meet. So there's this pressure that I find that next gens face in partnerships, that their parents didn't have that same, it was different. I mean, they had different pressures for sure. it was just different. And so it's trying to navigate, well, they want something different and they have a different relationship. I don't understand it. So there's helping bridge the understanding between the generations is really critical.
I've heard some of this discussion, not so much from a business point of view, but just generally from a intergenerational discussion or commentary, where you hear older people, the older boomers, were saying, why are people complaining about interest rates today? Because in the early 1980s, I mean, we had a mortgage and we didn't know if we were going to keep our house. We were paying 20% interest on the mortgage. We didn't know if we're going to keep the house. And now today, big deal. Interest rates have gone up. Yeah, but they're nowhere near what it was back in the early 1980s. And then you have the other generation, younger generation, say it's so much easier for you. House prices were cheap. Home prices were cheaper back then. Blah 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 blah. That's typical of a conversation that I hear at different levels.
Yes, and same for me. And what's really key about that conversation and many similar conversations is it's about competition. So now we're having a competition about, well, who had a more difficult time, whatever that is, whatever the case is, whatever the topic is. And that is what divides the generations. That's what creates those rifts and the lack of understanding. So what I work with for people is helping them lean into their curiosity and looking for, what can I learn? What can I learn from their previous experience? And how can we meet and understand each other? And so building a person's ability, next gen, or even the business owner's ability to ask questions, to go deeper and understand, well, what's it like for you? What was it like for you back then? Tell me, share with me the landscape. What was going on? How did you manage day to day? And starting to be curious so that we can start to, instead of competing, it's about connecting. And I think that that's where we can build a lot of trust with each other. And it's a really simple thing. It's ask 3 questions out of curiosity versus thinking about your own story. And that's what I'm positioning. So you can see that I've got it worse or difficult or more challenging than you had.
Fascinating discussion. I really appreciate you being on the Mayor of Money podcast. Holly, if anybody wants to connect with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, thanks, Rick. It's been such a pleasure. The time has gone by like that. People can check out my website. It's golden-lasso.com. You can send me an email, holly@golden-lasso.com. And you can always look me up on LinkedIn. So I look forward to hearing from people and share your thoughts on family businesses or questions you have.
A final parting question. So what's a couple of your favorite leadership books? And recognizing it depends on the set of circumstances, the type of book, but what are the ones that resonate most with you, that you've got the most value from? And I'm sure you've read dozens.
Oh my goodness, there's so many that I love. There's a couple that really stand out for me. There's John Maxwell's. I'm a huge John Maxwell fan. So John Maxwell's 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership is a classic and absolutely worth picking up. The other one that I don't know if it's a leadership book per se, but it's really wonderful, and it's on conversational intelligence. So it is called Conversational Intelligence, and I actually have it right here in front of me here by Judith Glasser, and it is wonderful on how to have conversations and the challenging conversations. And I think it's a great leadership book because it helps us understand conversation.
Wonderful. Well, listen, Holly, thank you very much for being on the Mayor of Money podcast. Really appreciate your wisdom and perspective and insight. I know it'll be most valuable to the people that tune into the podcast. Thanks again. And I want to say thank you to everybody for watching this episode of the Mayor of Money. And we'll see you next time on the Mayor of Money. Thanks for tuning in.